All right. So first let's learn this halacha, and we're going to begin with the Rambam. The Rambam himself in Hilchos Malachim writes as follows. This is text 1 right over here. Sagt the Rambam, Umoter lishkain, it is permitted to live b'chol ha'elam. It is permitted to live in the entire world. Chutz me'eretz Mitzrayim. The only place that a Jew in the world is not, it's an interesting lashon. You're allowed to live in the whole world, except for Eretz Mitzrayim. Sagt der Rambam weiter. There are three times that Torah says you're not allowed to return to Mitzrayim. One, shenemar lo yisayifun lashu baderech hazeh. These words are going to be important. This is talking about the king. The king should not take the Jewish people back to Mitzrayim, and it says lo yisayifun lashuv baderech hazeh. You're not going to go back on that road. That road, meaning the road from Eretz Yisrael leading to Mitzrayim, is not a road that should be traveled again. That's the first pasuk that Rambam brings. This is Hilchos Malachim. He brings a pasuk from Parsha Shoftim that's dealing with a halacha. Okay, if everyone could just mute themselves, that will be a good thing until you have a question. If you're shy, to mute yourself. Okay. Next, says Rambam, the next pasuk, Lo yisayif oid l'roisa. Sorry, I didn't have the time to check where this pasuk is. You're not going to see it again. And then in the parsha of Kriyas Yamsov, right over here, that we're going to be reading, or not reading, Lo yisayif l'roisam oid ad oilam. That you are not going to see them, meaning the Mitzrim, ever again. The Rambam continues, Alexandria b'chlal ha'isr. The reason that the Rambam is writing this is because Alexandria is a new city. When Alexander the Great came to Egypt, they founded that city at that time, which means that when the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, there was no city of Alexandria. So maybe one would have thought that it's not included in the Isser, so the Rambam says it is. Where does he get it from? There's the Midrashim and the Yerushalmi. Do this, the Rambam is just quoting it. Continues the Rambam. Muter lachzer le'eretz Mitzrayim. You could go there l'schoira u l'prakmatia. Schoira is business. Prakmatia is also business. I believe that prakmatia is a Latin word, and you guys can check this up. I believe that our word pragmatic comes from the same word. Okay. V'lichboish artzes acheres. It's also permitted to go into Egypt in order to conquer other lands. It's only forbidden to stay there long for lishtakeya, long period of time, permanent. Says the Rambam Vaisa. Here we get the first thing where we're limiting the Isser. The Fidik Rebbe was in Egypt. He was in Alexandria. When in 1929 in the summer, the Fidik Rebbe went to Eretz Yisrael and the boat went from Alexandria. Was there a Shiloh of Isser? There wasn't a Shiloh of Isser because it's not a Ein Aser El Lishtakei Sham. Just going there to change from one train, you went from a train to a boat. There's no Shiloh in Halacha. Weiter sagt der Rambam, Ve'ein loikin alav zeh. There is no malchus for this lav. Why? Shebe'eis haknisa muterhu. When you went in, it's permitted. Why when you went in it's permitted? Because it's permitted to go in for a short period of time. It's like, in America you have the issue of people who overstay their visas. It's like it's an easy aveda to do, because when you came in, you did it mutter, and then your isser was that you didn't go back. Okay, so even if you think that you know what, I want to stick around, aim by maisa. That thought doesn't have any maisa when you're thinking that you want to stick around. And as we know, you only get malchus on an actual maisa. And again, here the maisa in and of itself is not forbidden. It's only when the person has the thought about living there full time. Okay, so you don't get malchus, but it doesn't make it less of the isser. Continues the Rambam, v'yira li, it seems to me, she'in kavash eretz Mitzrayim melech Yisrael pi beisin, that if a Jewish king, with the permission of the Sanhedrin, conquers Eretz Yisrael, then it would be muteres to live there. This is the Rambam's own chiddush. He didn't get there so anywhere else, which is why he writes v'yira li. He doesn't say this so many times in his sefer. Why? Because the Isser is if you're going to go as an individual living there. That's what's Asr. But if we annexed it and made it part of Israel, no problem. Okay. The Ein Loikin Alav Zeh. Sorry, I went back. You're not allowed to go there to dwell there when it's controlled by non-Jews. Why? And here the Rambam gives a tam of the mitzvah. The depravity in Eretz Mitzrayim is worse than any other place. How do I know? Because there's one or twice in the Torah where it says, don't learn and do like Eretz Mitzrayim. That's where it says by the Aroyas, it says it, and it says in other places. It seems that this place, their behaviors are the worst ever, and so therefore, he's explaining why there's Isser to go back, which would also explain that if it becomes part of Eretz Yisrael, so then obviously the whole climate is going to change there, and you're not going to have people with negative behavior, and so the tam of the Isser goes off, and therefore the Isser itself goes off. This is what the Rambam says over here. Okay, let's continue in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, and we'll see that he says two interesting things. Number one, we're never allowed to live in Mitzrayim. Why? And here he says, so we should not learn their heresy, and that we do not take their negative paths. This is very similar to what he says in the Mishnah Torah. It's possible that does sound like it's a geographical thing, where in Sefer HaMitzvahs it does seem like the language is more about the people there, but anyway, that deal is lav dafka. Okay, now let me show you the next point in Sefer HaMitzvahs. He says, this is very important, because when you're going to be reading Parshas Beshalach on Shishal Pesach, and you're going to see the pasuk, you're going to see this doesn't sound like a mitzvah, doesn't sound like a commandment, it sounds like a story. Don't worry, you're never going to see them again. Ba Kabbalah, this is the term that the Rambam uses for the concept of halacha l'Moshe Messinai, for the concept of that the basic understanding of what a mitzvah is that was given from the Eibusher to Moshe and from Moshe to us in reading a pasuk, whatever it is. And in this case, same thing here, that although it may seem to us that it's just saying a story, the Rambam clarifies that it's halacha l'Moshe Messinai, it's mipia Kabbalah, that this is not a story and it is an actual commandment. The Sefer HaChinuch also gives a similar reason from the Rambam, but when you read it, you're going to notice he adds something. What does he say? Misharshei HaMitzvah. So as you know, the Sefer HaChinuch wrote a Sefer that's on all Taryag mitzvahs. I believe he follows the Rambam Shitta in how you count the Taryag mitzvahs. And what he does is he gives the basic of each mitzvah, and he also gives Taimei mitzvahs. This was a tradition in Sfard, that it was okay and in fact a good thing to speculate and offer reasons and benefits that particular mitzvahs have. This was not a feature in Ashkenaz. You will not find Rashi, the Tosasin, the Matzar Vitri, the Maharil. You will not find in Ashkenaz an attempt to do this, but that's a story of another time. In Sfard, this was very strong. The Rambam Mer Nevuchim, Sefer HaChinuch is another example. And he always uses the language Misharshei HaMitzvah, the root of the mitzvah, when he wants to say the tam of the mitzvah. That's just the language that he uses. In the Hakdama, he writes that he wrote the Sefer for his children, that they should learn on Shabbos. He saw that they were wasting time playing on Shabbos afternoon, and so therefore he decided to write this Sefer for them. We don't know who the author is. Okay. 1300s in Spain. So he says here, the people are bad, they're sinners. So now, if you just stop here, it's very similar to what the Rambam said. But the problem with that is, I mean, aren't there a lot of really, really bad places? Like Stoim was a pretty bad place. We don't find the Isser to live in Stoim. Okay, it was destroyed. But like, are we really supposed to say that for forever Mitzrayim's always going to be the most corrupt place? I mean, these types of things change, and in one society you end up having corruption here and then less corruption there, and it could be this is what's bothering the Sefer HaChinuch when he then goes and says, "V'akeo baruch hu hoitziyanu misham." God took us out from there. V'go'alanu b'chasadav miyadav, and He freed us in His kindness from their hand. Lizak hoiseinu, to benefit us, l'leches b'darchem, to go on the true path. V'ratza b'tuva agadol aleinu, and so in His great goodness, the Eibusher wanted levilti nashavoi litame v'seichem, that we shouldn't return to become impure among them. Kadei shaloi nilmoid kfira, saying we don't learn their kfira. Here he's copying the words from the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos, le'nelech b'darchem hamagunim, and that we shouldn't go in their negative ways. Eitzel Torah seinu hashlema, that's also very similar to the Rambam, alongside our Torah, or compared to our Torah, however you want to read it. So what's the Sefer HaChinuch adding here? The Rambam focus on Mitzrayim is really, really bad. So again, that's vulnerable to the question of there's got to be some other places that at least sometimes in history are going to be just as bad, if not worse. Says Sefer HaChinuch, yeah, it's a two-pronged argument. Number one, it's really, really bad. True. But number two, and God took us out from there. God took us out from the really bad place. So you're spitting in His face when you're going back to a really bad place. Whereas if you say that Las Vegas is Sin City, okay, fine. We're not going to ask you to go live in a nega Isser Torah to go live. We're not going to ask you why, because the concept of that you were in it and sunk in it, and the Eibusher came and took you out from it, and you're going back, that you don't have for Las Vegas, you don't have for any other place. And so I think that's what the Sefer HaChinuch is adding in order to build up the rationale for this mitzvah. Okay, so that's a background for this mitzvah. And now we go to the $1 million question, which is, again, so how could all these Daily Yisrael and Mashach HaDoros live there? So l'chayra, one of the biurim that we're going to touch on below, which has to do with Sancheriv, is going to touch on what you're saying. So we'll see there in a second. Okay, so let's go. So the first source, Sharab Allen mentioned the concept of the Rambam signing his name in this way, which is, I remember hearing this as a kid in Oli Torah, and it's a very, very, very disturbing statement. So where does it come from? It comes from the Sefer Kaftar V'Ferach. Kaftar V'Ferach is a serious Sefer. Kaftar V'Ferach was written by, his name was Ishtoiri Haparchi. Sorry, I don't know much about that name. He is someone who grows up in the milieu of the Baalei HaTosfos. I believe his Rebbe was Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, if you remember from the debate about the Gemara. So he's living in the 1200s. He leaves Germany, he leaves France, Germany, he goes to Eretz Yisrael, he writes a Sefer Kaftar V'Ferach, which deals with a lot of the halachic issues about living in Eretz Yisrael. So for example, the whole shaila of do we bring a Korban Pesach if you're able to, if you don't have the Beis HaMikdash, do you do it or not? Any shir on that topic is going to come back to what the Kaftar V'Ferach says about it. Likewise, many other issues about going on Har HaBayis and where's the Har HaBayis and many other things come from him. It's a very important sefer. So he writes as follows. Look at text 4. Hadar be'eretz Mitzrayim oiver b'shloish alavin. We know which 3. V'shamaiti b'Mitzrayim. So he was in Mitzrayim. So when he traveled to Eretz Yisrael, he also went to Mitzrayim. He heard from Reb Shmuel Zal. Echad mibnei banov shel ha-Rambam Mazel. That's how they used to, many of the Rishonim wrote the Rambam in this way. Reb Moshe ben Maimon Zechreinu Lavracha. Don't know why they wrote it specifically this way over one word. Maybe it would have been too long of a Rosh Tevis. Anyway, he is a grandson of the Rambam, this Reb Shmuel. When the Rambam would sign his name in a letter that he would send out, Hoya Messiah, he would conclude it saying his name, HaKoisev, I have written, Ha'oiver, who's the one who's written? The one who violates B'chol Yom Shloisha Lavin, Pliny, those 3 Lavin. This is the Makar, and officially comes from Kaftar V'Ferach. Kaftar V'Ferach is a reliable source, and it's bringing it that he heard it from the Einikel of the Rambam. Amarti loy derech chatzi nechama. So I told the Rambam's Einikel, says Rebbe Shtori Aparchi, I told the Rambam's Einikel to make him feel better. Shema harav zal hoya muchrach lamed sham. Maybe he had no choice. Maybe it was a oinus. We know the Torah oinus rachmana patre. Maybe it was a oinus sharaya roifel Melech Mitzrayim, because he was the doctor to Melech Mitzrayim. Uche'inyin sheshaninu soy parak meruba, as we say at the end of parak meruba and Baba Kama, where it speaks about Avtulas ben Reb Reuven, and it says over there, it was a Gzeira, there's a long story over there. There was a Gzeira in Rome that they're going to do, and this Avtulas ben Reb Reuven, he tiru loy lesaper kumi, he was allowed to cut his hair in the kumi style. Kumi style is some sort of style that was popular in Rome at the time, and it is usher for a Yid, the Gemara says, to have this type of haircut, and it's forbidden, the Gemara says, midoraisa, meaning under the pasuk of Chukasein Leiselechu. And nevertheless, Chachamim were matir for Avtulas ben Reb Reuven to have this haircut, Meishaya Karav Lamachos, because he was Karav Lamachos. Now, so what Kafta V'Ferach is saying is, maybe just like there's an Isser to have a Kumi, and it's Isser min Torah. And yet, the Chachamim said, you're allowed to do it, Mibnei Shoy Kar Lamachos, so maybe same thing. That the Rambam is an Isser to go to Mitzrayim. The Rambam is a Roife, and so he's a Kar of Lamachos, and so therefore it is permitted. This is the answer that he came up with, that he told the Einikel of the Rambam. Now, in order to make a little more sense of this, we have to understand, Taka, what was this heter that was given to Avtulas ben Reb Reuven. So, in order to understand this, we need to go to this Kesef Mishnah, because this Kesef Mishnah in Hilchos Avodah Zarah is crucial. The Kesef Mishnah here deals with a very simple question. He says, I don't understand. How could it be that the Chachamim allowed him to be over Issur D'Oraisa because he was a Kar of Lamalchus? At the end of the day, there is only three things that allow us to be over Issur D'Oraisa. And, excuse me, there's only one thing that allows us to be over Issur D'Oraisa, and that is Pikuach Nefesh. And so, why all of a sudden we come and say, oh, you have connections to the government, so you can go with Issur Min HaTorah? What's going on over here? This is what the Kesef Mishnah asks. V'im toimar, look at text 5, Kivin shakasav rabbeinu shaloika al kolach melu, because you get malchus for each of these, meaning including this haircut. How could the Chachamim come and say, yeah, you could be over Issur Min HaTorah? Zok the Kesef Mishnah gives two answers. V'yesh loymar, one answer is v'shumatzalas Yisrael. It's taka pikuach nefesh. It's hashal. It's not the heter is not, oh, you're kar of lamalchus, it's mutter. The heter is it's pikuach nefesh, it's mutter. V'shumatzalas Yisrael hu desharu. Ukishi Yisrael oindel lefnei hamalachim. When we have Jewish lobbyists in front of the kings, hey matzilim es Yisrael, they save Jewish people. This is the answer that's given over here. Now, what's the weak point in this answer? The weak point in this answer is that usually we speak about pikuach nefesh, we say there has to be a threat that you know about, that you're working on, that you're dealing with, but this concept of that my very presence in the court of the king on a random Tuesday has a din of pikuach nefesh, it's a little bit of a doichik answer, because what threat if you're going, there's a specific threat that you know, that there's a gzeira on Jews in a certain place, and you know, fine, so we understand that this pikuach nefesh is what we call in some of the shurim, I believe we spoke about it last year, the concept of pikuach nefesh lefanenu is a reality. Even if you don't want to say that it's mamish lefanenu, if you go with the statistical approach, and that's, you say, well, on a given day, there is a 60% chance or a significant chance that something's going to happen, or in the period, right? But stamazay, a blanket heter that just hanging out in the court of a king by itself is atzalas Yisrael. It's an interesting yesh la'ayin. You have to really look into that and understand if it's taka a valid heter, and it could be. This is why the Kesef Mishnah gives a second answer. What's the second answer? The second answer is inami sha'at Torah loy parta davar. It actually connects to today. Ela amra, I'll tell you in a second. So what's going on over here? This has to do also with Chol HaMoed. in general, we're used to the classification of D'Oraisa and D'Rabbanan. D'Oraisa is Chukasein Leisalechu. D'Oraisa is Yinan Chametz on Pesach. D'Rabbanan, but D'Rabbanan is Muksa. Right? That's clear. D'Oraisa, D'Rabbanan. The truth is that the Gemara says, and it says it about work on Chol Hamoed, that there's a middle category. The middle category is Isser Min HaTorah, that is not defined. Torah says, we are making an Isser on Melacha and Chol Hamoed. What does that mean? We have no say in the matter. Masra Hadavar L'Chachamim. And the Torah now comes, and the Chachamim now have the right to define what is going to end up being Melacha and Chol Hamoed. So then you say, okay, so we know whatever Melacha and Chol Hamoed is, I'll do whatever it is, right? Is that D'Oraisa or is it D'Rabbanan? It's both. It's D'Oraisa in the sense that the Torah is the one that said, I'll do Melacha and Chol Hamoed. It's D'Rabbanan in the sense that the Chachamim are the ones who have the right to include which behavior which is part of this Isser Torah. The Gemara says this about one or two things only. This is not a usual concept. The Kesef Mishnah is using this as a second answer. That's Minat Torah. You're not allowed to follow Gentile customs. What's the gather of a Gentile custom? Clothes, behavior, action, dancing, beards, hairstyle. What is it? And the Chachamim decide. They decided it's a kumi haircut. If they decided it's a kumi haircut, so then they also have the koyach to say it's a kumi haircut for everyone. But for the lobbyist, it's not an Isser, because they have the controlling power of this thing. These are the two answers that are given by the Kesef Mishnah to understand this heter. Now let's go back to Kafter V'Ferach. Kafter V'Ferach is saying that this heter would work for the Rambam. So we'd have to say one or two things. Either we would say that Pashut, the first answer, that it was Hatzalas Yisrael. The Rambam, by being in Mitzrayim, was Hatzalas Yisrael. Hatzalas which Yisrael? Hatzalas Yisrael of Mitzrayim, who by the way are not allowed to be there. Okay, but at least for the Rambam, they're not allowed to be there, but they shouldn't have to die. The Rambam, by being there, is saving them. He's a lobbyist in the court of the king and is saving a Hatzalas Navash B'Koch Navash. We don't know of any Gzeira the Yidden faced during the Rambam's whole Tkufa there. We don't know of. Okay, that's the shortcoming in this answer. In terms of the second answer that the Kesef Mishnah says, that wouldn't work. In other words, no one suggests that the Isra of returning to Mitzrayim is something that Masruah Davar L'Chachamim to define how it works, and so therefore the second one wouldn't work. It would only be the first one, and therefore it has the shortcomings of the issue of the not being Pikuach Nefesh. The other shortcoming in this beer, by the way, is that the Rambam did not start serving the king of Egypt until a good few years after he came to Mitzrayim. He came to Mitzrayim, and you may know the story, his brother supported him, and the Rambam was sitting ala Torah, v'ala avoida, v'ala philosophia, and after his brother who supported him died at sea, and we have a letter that the Rambam wrote about this, that's when he realized he had to support himself, and so that's when he became a physician. So there are some shortcomings in this answer, but we're going to qualify this as the first answer. We're going to see, I think, 5 or 6 explanations today. This is the first explanation offered by Ashtori HaParchi. Now, this is a troubling statement that the Rambam, the first thing that he says there, that the Rambam says, I'm over 3 times a day the Isser. So, Rebbe Vadia Yosef, who by the way was born in Mitzrayim, in his Sefer Shalos Teshuvos Yechavadas, he was asked in the late 70s, by Jewish journalists whether they're allowed to go to Mitzrayim to cover the Camp David peace talks. L'she'elas itoinoim dosiyim, ha'im mutar li'itoinoim miYisrael l'insoya leMitzrayim kedei lamoid mikarev u'ledaveach al hamasa umatan l'shalom b'diyunei v'idas kehir. This may not be Camp David. This may be something else. I don't know what the Cairo talks were. I don't know what year this was. Okay. Now, he goes on to say that it's permitted, and he gives all the sources, some of which we already saw, and more that we're going to say, and he's going to say that it's okay for a journalist to go there. Along the way, he quotes the Ishtori HaParchi, and that the Rambam admitted and signed every letter to saying that he was over 3 Yisurim. And he writes, Va'advarim temuyim moed. This is very bizarre. Lo yu'uman ki yisupar. Very hard to believe this account. Ki chalila, it is forbidden to assume Sharabeinu Rambam Yavar al Isurei Torah, that he was being over on Isur Torah. Va'afim nemer Sharambam hayo honestly shar b'Misrayim. Even if you're going to say what Ishtoria Parchi says, and that's that the Rambam was forced to do it, because he was the Reifa HaMelech HaAsarim, and so really, if you think about it, that's Anos. You could say two things. You could say Atzalas Nefashos Kol Yisrael, and you could say Anos. No, so he didn't. Kafter Ferach did not say Anos. He just said Muchrachaya. Okay, so even if you want to say that he had to do it because he was Reif HaMelech HaAsarim, and so he's saving all of Jewry there, Al Kapanan Lo Yitachin Shichta B'mu Yadav Shu Ever Ilsa Torah. You're not going to say that he's going to write. In other words, what he's saying is, let's say the Rambam was like, you know something, this is not ideal. You're still not, imagine it's not going to bring you to write on every letter that, oh yeah, I'm over Isurei Torah. This is, so Avad Yosef questions it. Then he goes like this, and he opens a bracket, he says, there are many Achronim who refuse to believe the story. See the Sefer Shvilei Das, Chelik Beis, Shekosov, sorry, I don't know who that is, and I didn't look it up. The Pamo Yischametz Levovenu. How much are my heart sours? Al Eida Zu Shekosov Kazaferach on this testimony. Yan Biadenu, says Shvilei Das, we have in our hands Kama Igros Merabenu Rambam, a lot of letters from the Rambam. We don't find any such signature. He doesn't only mean in the printed Igris. He may mean what they found in the Cairo Gniza. And they do have letters. That's how we have the signature of the Rambam on a number of letters. This admission does not appear there. So here's another person. B'tshuva shuva b'sefer Evan Sapir, in a tshuva kasa divrei kafter v'ferach, he says, Umi yamin, who can believe ki ish kadosh k'Rabbeinu Rambam ha'meforsim v'yadua shebachol ma shekasa b'chiburu v'noa poitz k'nam ekayim. The Rambam, if he keeps what he preaches. How can you say that he would have written such a thing? It must be that enemies started circulating that rumor. Gam Hagoin Harishon Letzion David Chazan. Likewise, the Rishon Letzion in Eretz Yisrael, David Chazan, I guess, I don't know when he was, 1700s, 1800s, Sefer Yisrael Leiv, Kasav, Ve'in Laham and Ledivrei Oimim Shayachosim B'Igreis Oiver B'Shlosh Alavim, Davada Bedusahu, it is definitely a shtus. So, Avad Yosef brings from 3 Svardish Gdolim, all who say they have a very hard time believing that the Rambam said this. I didn't have time to check it up. I remember seeing years ago a Yavitz saying that he doesn't believe this report either. But again, I didn't see it today, and it's memory, so I may be mistaken. But I do remember seeing that. So, where does that leave us about this testimony? It's a little difficult to say that Ishtoria Farchi made it up. We're not. You don't want to go there. To say that someone other than him wrote it in the Sefer, that's a huge conspiracy theory. So that means you have an Einakol of the Rambam saying that. Did the Einakol of the Rambam actually see this? Did he hear it from? Who did he hear it from? I don't know. I don't know what to say. I personally have a very hard time believing that the Rambam signed any letter that way. It just doesn't add up and doesn't make sense. I'm going to leave that as a mystery for us to move on. So far, besides for this mystery, we have one answer to the question. And the one answer that we have so far is the concept of Hatzalas Nefashis through being Karov Lamalchus. Let's move on. Rabbeinu Bechaya in Dvorim. Rabbeinu Bechaya in Dvorim says a very, very interesting thing. This is going to be answer number 2. Zu mitzvah l'sha'a. This is not a mitzvah l'doiris. Which would mean that it would not end up in the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs in Mishnah Torah because he does not include a mitzvah l'sha'a. Zu mitzvah l'shah, it was only for that generation. Kedei shelo yilmadu Yisrael ma'aseim, so that the Jews don't learn their behaviors, which we, same idea that we've seen in the other sources. Because that generation of the Mitzrim were very, very noteworthy of being involved in Toyeva. Therefore he told him this. There's no intention here to have a mitzvah l'doiris. Indeed, we see kama kehilos dorisham me'oz v'adayim. You have many kilos there. Rabbeinu Bechaya he's a student of the Rashba, I think. So he's writing in the 1300s. We see many kehilos that are there. If you had a mitzvah Jews would not have been makil in this area. And if they were makil, would have been moicha, and they were not. And so therefore that leads Rabbeinu Bechaya, the behavior and the lack of macha leads him to the conclusion that it was only an Isser on that generation, which would then answer the big question. What do we, for all eternity, the most corrupt place is going to be Mitzrayim? No, the answer is no. It was that generation, and that's why it was specific to that generation, because that's when Mitzrayim was the most corrupt place. This is Rabbeinu Bechaya's answer. Now, obviously, the Rambam disagrees with this. The Rambam could have said this if he wanted to. The Rambam did not believe this was a correct answer. We know that because he included it in Sefer HaMitzvahs. He included it in Mishnah Torah. He does not do that for something that's a mitzvah for only one generation. So Rabbeinu Bechaya here is kind of alone, suggesting a major chiddush. We'll see from some of the sources later that if you look at the Talmud, the Gemara, and the Midrash, it's also hard to say this explanation. So we saw our second explanation. We understand the weakness. And with that, we're going to move to our third explanation. Third explanation is going to come from the Smag. The Smag is Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol. Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol, he wrote this Sefer a little after, I think he started a little after the year 1240, is what he writes as in Hakdama. He's in France, Reb Moshe of Kussi. He's one of the Balei HaTosfos. And if you remember Marcus Lehman's book, The Count of Kutsi, or something like that, that's a novel about Reb Moshe. Anyway, so he wrote a Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol. It's actually an interesting story. He did not have Sefer Mitzvahs LaRambam. Sefer Mitzvahs LaRambam was written in Arabic, so it never came to France. The Jews wouldn't understand it. He did see Mishnah Torah, and he's like, you know something? It would be really nice to make a Sefer HaMitzvahs version of the Mishnah Torah. So he does that, and then a few years later, he learns that the Rambam had done it just in Arabic. So this was the Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol that he wrote. And when he deals with the mitzvah of Mitzrayim, he writes, "V'yesh teima kama kilos hashoichim sham." What's going on? V'gam Rabbeinu Moshe beramayim halach l'sham lagur. Okay, so he knows that the Rambam wasn't born there. Somehow he knows that the Rambam emigrated there. It'd be interesting to know how already then he knew that. Then he goes, "V'shema tamai," maybe the reason, and here we come to beer number 3. Mishum sha'ala sancherev ubilbul kol ha'olam kuloi v'gam Mitzrayim is bablu. We learn in where is it? Sefer Malachim that Sancherev comes and he disrupts the entire world, or maybe he just means the entire Middle East. And one of his methodologies is population migration, where he takes a people from one place and moves them to another place. In other words, the concept of Galos wasn't unique to the Jewish people. Galos happened to many peoples. Sancherev did it to the Aseres HaShvatim. He did it to many others. The idea was, if you don't want people to rebel, they're a lot less likely to rebel if they're living under you, not in their homeland. There's something about people feeling that they're in their homeland that's going to rebel. You're an occupier. But if you move them to a different place, then you're their founding father, so to speak. And so this was the political strategy that he introduced at the time. If Sancherev mixed up the whole world, he did the same thing to Mitzrayim. Now the truth is, the Smag brings that it's a machloikas, whether he mixed up Mitzrayim or not. So let's assume, according to the Shitta, that he did mix up Mitzrayim, so it's new people, so it's new country. You could go, and they're not so corrupt, or you just say, Bechlala, it's like Vayokam el Chadash HaMitzrayim, it's a new gather, it's like a new country. So this is the third explanation, which would mean that from the time of Sancherev, there is no Isser. Okay. The Sukkah Parak HaCholol is a problem. The Smag knows there's a problem. What's the problem? In Gemara Sukkah, it describes the community in Alexandria. And it says over there that there was a huge shul and they had the flags for Amen Yesh Merabah, and it was very fancy, and it goes on to describe, and the shoemakers sat by the shoemakers, and the tanners sat by the tanners, and the tailors sat with the tailors. This way, when you came in, you sat immediately with your group and you got parnasa. It's a long description about the community in Alexandria. And it says, if you never saw the shul in Alexandria, you never saw beauty in your life, or something like that. Then it says it was destroyed. Alexandria, my time the Inoish. Why was Alexandria, the Jewish community there, punished? When was it punished? This is after the Churban Beis Hamikdash. There's a big, significant Jewish community in Alexandria. I don't recall exactly. It was before the Bar Kokhba revolt. I believe around 10 years or so before the Bar Kokhba revolt. Something happened. Hadrian came and destroyed the Jewish community of Alexandria. So the Gemara here is reflecting on this that occurred in the 2nd century, and it says, why were they punished? Mishum the Avru Ahaikra the Loisei Sifun Lashuv, because they violated the pasuk of Loisei Sifun, and so Zakt. This is what the Gemara says. Zakt the Smag. What do you mean? It's after Sancheiriv. So I thought the Isra went away. Oh, from here we see the Gemara doesn't accept that Sancheiriv changed. So either Sancheiriv didn't come and mess up Mitzrayim, or he did come, but it doesn't matter. The Isser stays whether or not he mixed up the populations of Mitzrayim. And so therefore the Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol, the Smag, Moshe Mekutzi is saying the Sancheiriv answer number 3 is not such a good answer. By the way, from here you see, not like Rabbeinu Bechaya as well, you see from the Gemara clearly that it was a mitzvah l'doiris because it's being applied well after the generation of Yetzias Mitzrayim, many hundreds of years later. So this is answer number 3, which has its flaw. The Rebbe points out in a sikha. By the way, the Rebbe has a sikha on this subject, but doesn't discuss at length these sources, goes in a different direction. But what the Rebbe does mention in the sikha is that from the Rambam it's mashma that he doesn't accept this answer either, because the Rambam doesn't say that, since Sancheiriv it's mutter. So because the Rambam doesn't bring that qualifier, it's mashma the Rambam doesn't accept this answer. Continues the Smag, and here we move to answer number 4. The Ein Lanu Tam Lahatir in Loine Farish Kepirish Harav Rabbi Elazar Mimetz. Rabbi Elazar Mimetz authored a sefer called Sefer Yereim. It's a sefer from Ashkenaz. I believe he lived in the 1100s, but don't quote me on that. He lived in Metz, which is in France today. And Rabbi Elazar Mimetz seems to have been bothered by this shaila, and he came up with a very creative answer. What was the answer? Lo Asra Torah. He's the first one to give this answer. Remember, one of the psukim, Loisei Sifun, let's go up over here. What does the pasuk say? Look here. Loisei Sifun lashuv baderech hazeh oid. You're not allowed to go back baderech hazeh. Zok the Sefer Yereim, Lo Asa Teila baderech hazeh. Kaloimer, what does that mean? Me'eretz Yisrael le'Mitzrayim av Misharos Ismuter. You're not allowed to take that path. Which path? The path that a king who's in Eretz Yisrael would take to Mitzrayim. So that's through the Sinai desert. But if you go in any other route, it's mutter. This is the 4th answer that's given by the Sefer Yereim, and this is the answer that Sefer Mitzvahs Gadol seems to accept. Now, there are weaknesses to this answer. Number 1, as we're going to see, when the Rambam went to Eretz Yisrael, went to Mitzrayim, he didn't go straight to Mitzrayim. He went to Eretz Yisrael, and then from Eretz Yisrael went down to Mitzrayim. So that this explanation wouldn't work for the Rambam, and the Rambam wasn't the only one. There were many people who would have done that type of thing. So that's flaw number 1 in this explanation. Another, as we're going to see, the Radvaz is going to point out, is that only works in one of the psukim. Only one pasuk says Baderech Hazeh. The other psukim just say you're not allowed to, right? Let's go back and see the psukim. This one says Loisei Sifu L'Roisam Adai. You're not going to see them ever again. And this one says Loisei Sivoid L'Roisa. You're not going to see the land ever again, without anything about Baderech Hazeh. Also, to just introduce a major Baderech Hazeh, that explanation, to just introduce it, without any source, it's itself a big chiddush. And again, coming back, that the Rambam doesn't bring this, and therefore the Rebbe assumes that the Rambam does not accept this explanation, given the fact that he didn't bring it. Okay, but that is our fourth explanation for this behavior. Now, in the Ritva, we are going to have a fifth explanation. He brings some of the stuff we already saw. Our main focus is going to be on the fifth. I lost count. Are we holding number 5? I lost count. Let me just make sure I'm getting this right. Number 1 is Kaftan Ferach. Number 2 is Rabbeinu Bechaya. Number 3 is the Smag. And number 4 is the Smag. Yeah. So now Sefer Yerei. Number 5. Miut Tmiya Milsa Zak the Ritva. The Ritva is a contemporary Rabbeinu Bechaya. He writes Tmiya Milsa. Al Mesam Chol Lager Bezman Ez Hebim Misraim Kegoyin HaRambam Savachama Gdoilim Achelim. Yesh Oimrim. By the way, the Rasag as well, I believe, lived in Mitzrayim. Yesh Oimrim She'oisan Ayoris Kfar Nizbabul V'Nechrevu Ve'elu Ayoris Acherus Hein She'Nisyashu Acherikei. This is similar to the Sancherev answer, but without a focus on people moving from one place to another. It's those cities have already been destroyed. And so therefore it's Panim Chadashas Ba'olakan, new cities have been built, and so therefore the Isser doesn't apply. It's not the same thing as Sancherev, because that puts it at a certain time in history. This doesn't put it at a certain time in history. Sancherev is about people. This is about the cities being destroyed. So we'll call this answer number 5, very similar to that one, but not the same one. Then he brings the Rabbi Eliezer Mimetz explanation right here. So that's already, we had that one. That was answer number 4. He brings, then he goes Hanach and Yoiser. I think the true answer is, and here he gives answer number 6. She'ena Yisrahu ala bizman she'Yisrael shruyin alad masan. The Isser is only when Jews are living in Eretz Yisrael. Avo bizman hazeh. Why? So you say like this: when you're living in Eretz Yisrael, we don't have a place to be. We have a good place to be, a place where we belong. So the Torah can then start making limitations on where you're allowed to live. Torah says, don't live here, don't live there. Avo bizman hazeh. It's weird. The Gzeira is that we need to be spread out all over the world. So we see God wants us living all over the place. And we get kicked out of one place, let's add. We get kicked out of here and get kicked out of there and whatever. So kol chutz la'aretz echadu. Entire chutz la'aretz is one thing. It's all the same thing. And ein iser elo shalalatzeis midas min haaretz l'chutz la'aretz. And so therefore, the only issue you have is you're not allowed to go out of Eretz Yisrael. But there is no Isser about anything in Chutz La'aretz itself. There's no Isser anymore. This is very similar to what, not very similar, somewhat similar to what Rabbeinu Bechaya said. He said it was only for a certain generation. Ritva is saying it's only for when we have control over Eretz Yisrael. Again, all the points that we said earlier. The Gemara Alexandria, the Jews again were not in control of Eretz Yisrael anymore. Many were forced to leave by the Romans or whatever. The Rambam doesn't bring this exception. That's going to apply to all of these. But that is answer number 6. Now, interesting, you have a tshuva from Rabbi Herzog. Rabbi Yitzchok Isaac Halevi Herzog, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi in Eretz Yisrael, right? I think so, yeah. He was a chief rabbi before it was a state. In Tafshin Hey, 1945, he wrote a tshuva about the whole question of being in Mitzrayim, and he brings many, many, many sources on the subject. Just so I didn't have time to go through the whole thing, there's one line that caught my attention. He brings the Ritva, and by the way, he has a Marshal who says the same thing. That when we are not living in Eretz Yisrael, we are allowed to live in Mitzrayim. He brings a Marshal who says the same thing, and then he says, so what does that mean for today in 1945? What do we say? Do we say that in 1945 Yisrael are shruyin al admasan or not? So look what he says. Miu bizman hazeh yesh l'stapik l'chayr. There's a suffix. Kivin sheyesh lanu shuv eza yaseh beretz koshenu. We have a certain anchor in this land. What's he referring to? There has been the Balfour Declaration and the League of Nations adopted it and built it into, and therefore the British mandate, and is building a Jewish homeland. And we've had major hundreds of thousands of Jews are living in Israel more than in any other period for hundreds and hundreds of years, going back who knows how long. So we have a certain anchor here. V'afa became, on the other hand, calls man shalom is batal ha-sefer halavan. The white paper hasn't been nullified yet. What is he referring to? So he's referring to the British white paper, starting in when was the first one? I think starting in 1930, the British government started issuing white papers, which were all about walking back the Balfour Declaration, appeasing the Arabs, saying that they're going to limit the number of Jews entering Eretz Yisrael. In 1939, they issued a new white paper that basically said no more immigration, very few numbers for 5 years, and then after that, zero, nothing without Arabs' consent, which basically was going to be it's all over. So he's pointing to that. We're still in Galus because of the white paper. So so maybe the Ritva's thing. So maybe it's okay to live in Mitzrayim because we don't have control over Eretz Yisrael. And he's not sure. On the other hand, we have so much by 1945, maybe it is, and he doesn't resolve that. He continues to talk about the other things. I just thought that was interesting. Okay, so how many explanations do we have so far? I believe it's 6. Now let's go to the Radvaz. The Radvaz is going to offer a 7th answer. He's going to mention some of the other ones. He's going to knock them off. He's going to mention a 7th, perhaps an 8th. Let's see. So who's the Radvaz? The Radvaz is living in the 1500s. He's born in Spain, Portugal. He experiences the expulsion in the 1492, 1497. He goes to Eretz Yisrael and to Egypt, and he shuttles back and forth. He's living in Yerushalayim for a time, he's living in Sfas for a time, he's living in Mitzrayim. When he lived in Mitzrayim, he was the Posek Ader in there, and he has many, many children. David ben Zimra is his name. He passed away in the 1570s. So this is good because after the Rambam, he's the only next source that we're going to be dealing with. Well, Avad Yosef too, but he's one of the sources that live in Israel. So we give extra weight or extra interest, perhaps, to such sources. So right on the Pirush of the Rambam, I have a question. Why are we living in Mitzrayim? By the way, this Pirush he wrote Pirush on the Rambam he wrote when he was already back in Eretz Yisrael. So he goes, so here he brings the answer from the Yereim. Koloimam Eretz Yisrael Mitzrayim. Avu Mishar says mutar. Adkan. The ain't a time maspik. It's not a good answer. Why? Shakra the loisasha b'derech hazeh oid. You only worked it out in one pasuk. B'derech hazeh. Avu hanach kroy diksiv loisasiv loisam oid. But what about the other psukim? What are you going to say? It doesn't work there. So therefore he knocks off that answer and he gives his answer, which is answer for us, answer number 7. Yesh li tein tam. The explanation we're going to offer is the that we know. You're only not allowed to go live for a long period of time. You're not allowed to go dwell there. You're allowed to go for business or if you need to conquer a neighboring land. So therefore, this explains that all the people that went to Mitzrayim, they didn't go to live there. They went there to do business. Then what happened was, they're like, you know what, it's good here, let me stay. There is no lav, ela isura ba'alma, there's no lav, there's only an isser. What does this mean? So people they don't understand what it means. What do you mean there's no lav? There is a lav. You don't get malchus. But what does he mean there is no lav? The Rambam said that there is a lav. He goes, it's not a lav. Ela isura ba'alma. What does it mean? Isura ba'alma? And because Torah chatiltul, it's difficult to travel. It's hard to find parnasa in other places. So they disregarded the isser. Seems what he's saying here is that it's not a lav in the sense of a lav of malchus. Ela isura ba'alma is just a loisaseh without malchus, so therefore it's less chamor, and because it's less chamor, the people were not choshed. Is this explanation? It's not really explanation. I don't even know if we should call it explanation number 7. It's a psychology. He's saying Yidden wouldn't be over a lav with malchus. That's what they're not going to do. They went beheter. Now it's not a lav with malchus. They they're just being over a Isser, and because it was difficult, so they lo chashu l'Isser. In other words, it's not going to work for the Rambam. You can't say this for the Rambam, and it's not really an explanation. And you'll see later, others have said, like, what type of answer is he saying over here? Just because there's no Malchus, that's not really an answer. So therefore, he himself continues. What about the Rambam? You can't say what I said before about the Rambam. So he says, he was an onus al pi malchus reifel malchus. This is not the same as Kafter Ferach. Kafter Ferach was saying he needed to stay there in order to help save the Jews. Hatzalas nefashos. This is the king didn't let him leave. In other words, the Rambam went down. Why? Just for a few weeks. And it was his mutter. And then he ended up being an onus where the king said, you must stay. Again, the problem with this is he was here for a good few years before he became a Reifel Melech Usarim. But this is answer number 7, is that he didn't have the ability to leave because he was treating the king. Again, another problem with this, it's an individualistic answer. It doesn't help for the thousands of others who were living there. Then he says about himself, the Gamani Nisyashafti Sham Zman Meruba Lilmoy Tairo Lalamda. I live there. Why? Why did I live there? To learn and to teach. Meaning there were Rebbes there that we didn't have in Eretz Yisrael. And I also had the ability to teach there in a way that I didn't have in Eretz Yisrael. V'kavati Sham Yeshiva V'chi Hai Gavno Mutter. And if you're doing that, it's Mutter V'shuv Basi Yerushalayim. And then I came to Yerushalayim. This is answer number 8. Answer number 8 is that if it's shlichus, not shlichus, if it's learning Torah, you're allowed to go to Mitzrayim. You're allowed to go to learn, you're allowed to go to teach. Now, why does he add the words Veshuv Basi Yerushalayim? Maybe he's trying to say, he's not writing his autobiography in the Pirush on the Rambam. It's shaykh, what he's trying to do here is say, I wasn't going to live there. I was going to teach Torah and to learn. And when I was done, I came to Yerushalayim. In other words, it shows that it wasn't really living there, even though it was for quite a while, because it was about Torah. Anyway, that's answer number 8. Now, the Radvaz also has a tshuva. It seems to me, when I read it the first time, that this is a different explanation. Answer number 9. He says, he's talking about a completely different topic there, and he says, we rely on living in Mitzrayim on the following reason. Why? How are we allowed to be here? We come not to stay, but to live. And when we can, we do not pass up the opportunity. Here, explanation number, again, I forgot the number already, 8 or 9, is that, you know something? It's only mutter to come here, not to live here, but to come here and to be here. And the second you get an opportunity to leave, I don't know why it says Eretz Yisrael, but it says Eretz Yisrael, you leave. That's the only heter that he has over here, and this is a different explanation and a different heter. And again, the problem would be for all those who passed up on that experience. Perhaps the Rambam didn't have that experience because he was onus, as he himself, the Radvaz, said. Okay. So that was, we saw 8 or 9 different explanations being offered. By the way, there are probably more. I limited myself mostly, if not completely, to the explanations of the Rishonim. I did. So there are 8 or 9 different explanations in the Rishonim about this issue. I assume you can see that nothing really satisfies. And this sentiment was expressed in Charles Shuva's Kol Mevaser, written by a Rav whose last name was Roth, who was in Eretz Yisrael. He was involved in Rabbanas Harashas in Eretz Yisrael, and he dealt with the following question. Right after World War II, there was a suggestion that maybe the Rabbanas Harashas should make a ban about going to Germany. Alvar shehutza bevidas rabbanim lahachlis cheira mitan rabbanei oretz shalapiv asur yeh lechol Yehudi lidroich al admas Germania v'chana rabbanei yiskim alatza. So this was the idea. Now, by the way, there is there are the Svardim have a tradition that there was a chayra made about not returning to Spain. It's an interesting topic. Where is the first time it appears? It doesn't really appear in Svardim, I believe, until the 1700s or so. Most people assume that there was never such a chayra, and Rabbi Vadi Yosef and other Rabbanim, including Roth in this Tshuva Kol Mavasar, deals with it. There's a Shmua, but it's not the... So he was against doing this in 1945. And he said different things. One of the things he said is that it's not going to work. And I'll summarize his point. He's like, even when it comes to Issa D'Oraisa of not going to Mitzrayim, look what happened. It's not being observed. And now you want to create another problem? You want to create this for Germany? Please, let's not do it. So this is what he writes. Let's go through. So he goes, Poik Chazi, look at the Rambam Hilchos Malachim. You're not allowed to live in Mitzrayim. Smag, Hagoyis Maimini. The Hagoyis Maimini says the same thing that the Smag says pretty much. Radvaz, Balkafter Referachva, Pri Chodosh. He says one of the other answers that are brought earlier. Niskashu Ma'oid Limso Yishuv, Almas Hachudelim Bene, Uvenem Rambam Atzma, Lishkem Mitzrayim. And look what he says here. V'chol Anshe Chayil, Loi Motzu Yedeyem B'tirutz Barur Ur Maspik. All of the very, very powerful people, meaning the greatest Talmud Chachamim, were not able to come up with a clear and sufficient answer. And now he proceeds to knock off all the explanations or some of the explanations that were given, and he raises some of the points that we did. So he's like, the idea of Baderech Hazeh, remember that answer, that only that route? He's like, first of all, the Rambam doesn't say that explanation. And the reason is, as Radvaz says, because the other psukim don't use the word Baderech Hazeh. And moreover, Harambam Nasam Eretz Yisrael Mitzrayim. So he gives two reasons why that explanation doesn't work. And now he brings the explanation of the Smag, which he has in the name of the Pri Chodosh. So he knows who Hirgishu Ba'asfer Shakasa, Gemara Sukkah, Anshe Alexander, and then Shwasa. Why is Alexander being punished? It's after Sancheirav. Okay. Radvaz, he says, Be'emes Diver Radvaz Tmuim Einim Aloid. Remember that Radvaz? Is like, oh, it's difficult to leave, so people don't leave. You can't do that. When it comes to Rabbanon, fine. But Yisrael Mitzrayim is the Torah over Balaam. No, then it's not Malchus, because Lav Shem B'Maisa. So he's like, I don't understand that part of the Radvaz. Then he goes, Seol Lamad Yeshivas Mitzrayim, she Isser Torah, Loi Hoya Yochal HaTzibur, Lamoy Boy, V'hurvu L'chafes Heter. This is essentially his conclusion. When it comes to living in Mitzrayim, the bottom line is that Jews needed to live in Mitzrayim because of being expelled from other places, because of security, because of economic opportunity, and they went. And then we had to kind of figure out Hatadim, and we came up with all these different Hatadim, none of which really are good enough in his mind. So he goes, so we're still having a hard time with the Mitzrayim one, now you want to start a new one? He says, I don't think this is a good idea. So that pretty much is a summary of the classic sources on this particular topic. I think we do learn from here the difficulty. You see the difficulty when it comes to Yidden who are living in Golos and having a very difficult time finding a safe place to live. This Isser just became very, very difficult. That's just the reality. And Jews moved there. And it then becomes an exercise of trying to figure out these 9 different explanations of why perhaps it's going to be mutter, but I think we all feel that none of them satisfy, and there's a reason for that. And it would seem that the Rambam didn't accept any of these explanations as clear-cut. Maybe he felt that maybe you could be soymech on it or whatever, but not clear-cut enough, universal enough to belong in his Sefer of Mishnah Torah. So maybe he relied on it for for himself or whatever it is. Maybe he felt he had no choice. But I doubt he wrote that he was being over. Even if someone does an Aveda, you're not supposed to gloat about it and talk about it. And if it's bein Adam Lamakayim, you're not even supposed to share it with other people. So it's another reason not to take seriously that thing from Ishtoirei Aparchi. despite everything else. So let's just close Me'ein HaPsicha, and that is what you do see in this mitzvah that we're going to read on Shishal Pesach L'Sesifu L'Reisam Eid Al Olam is the complete break that Hashem wanted us to have from Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that complete break is something that did not happen on the Leil of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's something, Egypt still existed, they still pursued the Jews. That complete break only happens at Kriyas Yamsuf. And indeed, the Jews never saw the Egyptians, and that generation never suffered from their hands ever again. This is the idea of not a temporary solution where the threat still looms, but a complete cure and a complete solution. And as I said in the opening, the Rebbe explains that this is why not only Achren Shal Pesach, when we read about Mashiach, is the day about the Gula Shlema, also Shvi Shal Pesach, which is about Kriyas Yamsuf, which sounds like it's about the past, is really, this is also connected to the Gula Asida for this reason, that Gula Asida is all about a complete redemption, not, I got you out of the problem and the threat still looms. And indeed, that's what Kriyas Yamsuf was all about. And in that sense, Kriyas Yamsuf was a me'ain of the Geula Shlema. So a lot of this is conveyed in this pasuk, L'Sesifu L'Reisam Eid Al Olam, never seeing them again. Today in Mitzrayim, very, very small Jewish kila, Baruch Hashem. Most of those Jewish people are living in Eretz Yisrael. Hopefully for them, life is better, not begashmis beruchnius, though I'm afraid in some respects that may not be true. And that's pretty much it. I got Yom Tov, everybody, and now questions, comments, hesitations, denials.